In Module 4, we'll discuss the law of signs and fractions and how the law of signs applies to fractions. The law of signs are applied to addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Division is of particular importance with respect to fractions, as fractions indicate division. When adding or subtracting fractions, we can evaluate the sign of each fraction before we add or subtract them. We will look at the law of signs as it applies to multiplication and division, as we are interested in the rules with respect to fractions. The following rules apply equally to whole numbers, fractions, and literal expressions, letters. Rule number 1. When multiplying or dividing like signs, the result is always positive. For example, positive 15 times a positive 3 equals a positive 45. A negative times a negative 15 times a negative 3 equals 45. Negative times a negative equals a positive. Positive times positive equals a positive. Division, same thing. 15 positive divided by a positive 3 equals a positive 5. Negative 15 divided by a negative 3 equals a positive 5. This is a positive divided by a positive, result positive. Negative divided by a negative, the result is positive. Here we have negative and positive numbers mixed. We have a positive 15 times a negative 3. The result is a positive times a negative equals a negative. Here we have negative 15 times a positive 3. Negative times a positive equals a negative. Negative 15 times a positive 3 equals negative 45. Division. Positive 15 divided by a negative 3 equals a negative 5. Positive divided by a negative equals a negative. Negative 15 divided by a positive 3 equals negative 5. Negative 15 divided by a positive 3, negative divided by a positive equals a negative. Here we have a positive fraction, 3/5. Both of these are positive. The result must be positive because this indicates division. The signs are not indicated, so they are positive. If there was a sign indicated, there would be a minus sign, and then it would be a negative value. Positive divided by a positive is a positive. Rule 1. Negative divided by a negative. Negative 3 divided by a negative 5. The result is going to be 3/5. We can just change this fraction, these signs, they cancel out, and it becomes positive. The signs are negative. A negative divided by a negative is positive. Rule 2. Negative 3 divided by a positive 5. The result has to be negative because a negative divided by a positive is negative. Here we have a positive divided by a negative. The result has to be negative because positive divided by a negative is negative. Here we have two positive numbers. 1/4 times 3/5. We're just going to multiply across 1 times 3. Positive times a positive is positive 3. 4 times 5, positive times positive is going to be positive. So 4 times 5 is positive 20. The fraction result is positive. Evaluate the signs of each fraction first. The signs are alike. A positive divided by a positive and a positive times a positive is positive. We can just look at this. This is positive times a positive. The whole result must be positive. Here we have an example of unlike signs. Negative 4 times a positive negative 1 divided by a positive 4 times a positive 3 divided by a negative. We have a fraction is a negative, and this fraction is a negative. A negative times a negative is positive, so the result would have to be positive. Let's look at it this way. Negative 1 times positive 3 would be negative 3. Positive 4 times negative 5 would be negative 20. Negative 3 divided by a negative 20, the result would have to be positive. Rule 1 applies. Evaluate the sign of each fraction first. Both are negative. Negative times negative, positive. Fractions indicate division. Let's look at this here. We have negative 1 divided by a negative 4 times a negative 3 divided by a positive 5. Negative times a negative, negative 1 times negative 3 is 3. A negative 4 times a positive 5 is negative 20. I can also look at this and I can say, okay, this is a positive fraction times a negative fraction. The result would have to be negative. Rule 2 applies. Evaluate the signs of each fraction first. The first is positive, the second is negative, the result must be negative. The signs are unlike. A positive times a negative is a negative. Here we have negative 1 over negative 4 times negative 3 over 5 equals, let's look at this fraction. This is positive, so I can rewrite it. I can cancel out these negative signs and it becomes positive 1/4 times negative 3 over 5, positive times a negative, negative 3 over 20. We can also evaluate the signs by multiplying the numerator straight across and the denominator straight across. But when adding and subtracting, it gets complicated as we are multiplying, dividing, adding and subtracting signs. Negative 1 times a negative 3 equals a positive 3. A negative 4 times a positive 20 equals a negative 80. Positive 3 divided by negative 20 or negative 3 divided by 20, they have the same ratio. For example, positive divided by a negative, the answer would have to be negative, and a negative divided by a positive, the answer would have to be negative. 3 divided by 20 is still 0.15, minus 3 divided by 20 is still 0.15. The results are the same, negative. When adding like signs, add the absolute value and keep the sign of the numbers. For example, 3 plus 4 equals 7. Minus 3 plus minus 4, we add the absolute values, which is 7, and we keep the sign of the numbers. This is negative 7. When adding positive and negative numbers, subtract the smaller from the larger and keep the sign of the larger. 4 plus minus 3. 3 is smaller than 4, so we're going to subtract it from it, and we're going to keep the sign of the positive. So 4 minus 3 equals 1, and it's positive. Here we have a larger negative number, 3 plus minus 4. We're going to subtract the smaller from the larger. 3 from 4, absolute value gives us 1, and we're going to keep the sign of the larger number, negative 1. When subtracting, change to addition, and the rules 3 and 4 apply. For example, 5 minus 3 equals 2. We can change this to 5 plus minus 3. We're going to subtract the smaller from the larger, gives us 2, and we're going to keep the sign of the larger. Positive 2, rule 4 applies. When subtracting, change to addition, the rules 3 and 4 applies. 3 minus 5 equals 3 minus, we're going to subtract smaller from the larger, gives us 2. And we're going to keep the sign of the larger, which is the 5 here, so it's minus 2. And when we change it to addition, it becomes 3 plus minus 5, same thing. Subtract smaller from the larger. 3 from 5 gives us 2, and we're going to keep the sign of the larger. When subtracting a negative number, the two sequential negative signs get changed to a plus. For example, here we have 3 minus minus 5. We're going to change this. Two negative numbers automatically get changed to a plus. So we have 3 plus 5. They're both positive. The result is positive. Rule 3 applies. When subtracting negative number, the two sequential negative numbers get changed. Minus 3 minus 5. We have minus, we're going to change it to an addition. Minus 3, these two negative signs get changed to a plus. Minus 3 plus 5. We're going to subtract the smaller from the larger, which is 2, and we're going to keep the sign of the larger, which is positive. Make sure that you click the link below to take the online quiz, and if you need to, go back and review this video as many times as you must in order to absorb the information. If you do all this on all the modules, you'll be more prepared to carry on with your career in mathematics or using it in whatever career path you go to.